John II, or John II, also called John the Good, was a monarch of the House of Valois who ruled as King of France from 1350 until his death. When John II came to power, France was facing several disasters. The Black Death, which caused the death of nearly half of its population, popular revolts known as Jacqueries, free companies of routiers who plundered the country, and English aggression that resulted in disastrous military losses, including the Battle of Poitiers of 1356, in which John was captured. While John was a prisoner in London, his son Charles became regent and faced several rebellions, which he overcame. To liberate his father, he concluded the Treaty of Bretagne, by which France lost many territories and paid an enormous ransom. In an exchange of hostages, including his son Louis, John was released from captivity to raise funds for his ransom. Upon his return in France, he created the franc to stabilize the currency and tried to get rid of the free companies by sending them to a crusade. But Pope Innocent VI died shortly before their meeting in Avignon. When John was informed that Louis had escaped from captivity, he voluntarily returned to England, where he died in 1364. He was succeeded by his son Charles V. Early life. John was 9 years old when his father had himself crowned as Philip VI of France. John's father's ascent to the throne was unexpected, and because all female descendants of his great-uncle Philip the Fair were passed over, it was also disputed. The new king had to consolidate his power in order to protect his throne from rival claimants. Philip therefore decided to marry off his son John quickly at the age of 13 to form a strong matrimonial alliance, at the same time conferring upon him the title of Duke of Normandy. Initially a marriage with Eleanor, sister of the King of England, was considered, but instead Philip invited John of Luxembourg, King of Bohemia, to Fontainebleau. Bohemia had aspirations to control Lombardy and needed French diplomatic support. A treaty was drawn up. The military clauses stipulated that, in the event of war, Bohemia would support the French army with 400 infantrymen. The political clauses ensured that the Lombard crown would not be disputed if the King of Bohemia managed to obtain it. Philip selected Bona Bohemia as a wife for his son, as she was closer to childbearing age, and the dowry was fixed at 120,000 florins. Marriage with Bona Bohemia. John came of age on 26 April 1332 and received overlordship of the Duchy of Normandy, as well as the counties of Anjou and Maine. The wedding was celebrated on 28 July at the Church of Notre Dame in Milan in the presence of 6,000 guests. The festivities were prolonged by a further 2 months when the young groom was finally knighted at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris as the new Duke of Normandy. John was solemnly granted the arms of a knight in front of a prestigious assistance bringing together the kings of Bohemia and Navarre, and the dukes of Burgundy, Lorraine and the Brabant. Duke of Normandy. Upon his accession as Duke of Normandy in 1332, John had to deal with the reality that most of the Norman nobility was already allied with the English camp. Effectively, Normandy depended economically more on maritime trade across the English Channel than on river trade on the Seine. The duchy had not been English for 150 years, but many landowners had holdings across the Channel. Consequently, to line up behind one or other sovereign risked confiscation. Therefore, the Norman nobility were governed as interdependent clans, which allowed them to obtain and maintain charters guaranteeing the duchy a measure of autonomy. It was split into 2 key camps, the Counts of Tancarville and the Counts of Harcourt, which had been in conflict for generations. Tension arose again in 1341. Geoffroy d'Harcourt raised troops against the king, rallying a number of nobles protective of their autonomy and against royal interference. The rebels demanded that Geoffroy be made duke, thus guaranteeing the autonomy granted by the charter. Royal troops took the castle at Saint-Sauveur-le-Vicomte and Geoffroy was exiled to Brabant. 3 of his companions were decapitated in Paris on 3 April 1344. In 1342, John was in Avignon at the coronation of Pope Clement VI, and in the latter part of 1343, he was a member of a peace parley with Edward III of England's Chancery Clerk. By 1345, increasing numbers of Norman rebels had begun to pay homage to Edward III, constituting a major threat to the legitimacy of the Valois kings. The defeat at the Battle of Crecy in 1346 and the rendering of Calais further damaged royal prestige. Defections by the nobility increased, particularly in the north and west, whose land fell within the broad economic influence of England. Consequently, King Philip decided to seek a truce. Duke John met Geoffroy d'Harcourt, to whom the king agreed to return all confiscated goods, even appointing him sovereign captain in Normandy. John then approached the Thancarville family, whose loyalty could ultimately ensure his authority in Normandy. The marriage of John, Viscount of Milan, to Jean, the only heiress of the county of Thancarville, ensured that the Milan-Thancarville party remained loyal to John, while Geoffroy d'Harcourt continued to act as defender for Norman freedoms and thus of the reforming party. Treaty of Mantes and Battle of Poitiers. In 1354, John's son-in-law and cousin, Charles II of Navarre, who, in addition to his small Pyrenean kingdom, also held extensive lands in Normandy, was implicated in the assassination of the Constable of France, Charles de la Cerda. Nevertheless, to have a strategic ally against the English in Gascony, John signed the Treaty of Mantes with Charles on the 22nd of February 1354. The peace did not last between the two, and Charles eventually struck up an alliance with Henry of Grosmont, the first Duke of Lancaster. The next year, John signed the Treaty of Valognes with Charles, but this second peace lasted hardly longer than the first. In 1355, the 100 Years' War flared up again. In July 1356, Edward, the Black Prince, son of Edward III of England, took an army on a great chevauchée through France. John pursued him with an army of his own. In September, a few miles southeast of Poitiers, the two forces met. John was confident of victory. His army was probably twice the size of his opponent's, but he did not immediately attack. While he waited, the papal legate went back and forth, trying to negotiate a truce between the leaders. There is some debate over whether the Black Prince wanted to fight at all. He offered his wagon train, which was heavily loaded with loot. He also promised not to fight against France for 7 years. Some sources claim that he even offered to return Calais to the French crown. John countered by demanding that 100 of the prince's best knights surrender themselves to him as hostages, along with the prince himself. No agreement could be reached. Negotiations broke down, and both sides prepared for combat. On the day of the Battle of Poitiers, John and 19 knights from his personal guard dressed identically. This was done to confuse the enemy, who would do everything possible to capture the sovereign on the field. In spite of this precaution, John was captured. Though he fought with valor, wielding a large battle-axe, his helmet was knocked off. Surrounded, he fought on until Denis de Morbecque, a French exile who fought for England, approached him. Sire, Morbecque said, I am a knight of Artois. Yield yourself to me and I will lead you to the Prince of Wales. King John surrendered by handing him his glove. That night King John dined in the red silk tent of his enemy. The Black Prince attended to him personally. He was then taken to Bordeaux, and from there to England. Although Poitiers is centrally located, it is not known that anyone, noble or peasant, attempted to rescue their king. While negotiating a peace accord, John was at first held in the Savoy Palace, then at a variety of locations, including Windsor, Hertford. Eventually, John was taken to the Tower of London. Prisoner of the English. As a prisoner of the English, John was granted royal privileges that permitted him to travel about and enjoy a regal lifestyle. At a time when law and order was breaking down in France and the government was having a hard time raising money for the defense of the realm, his account books during his captivity show that he was purchasing horses, pets, and clothes while maintaining an astrologer and a court band. The Treaty of Bretagne set his ransom at 3,000,000 crowns. Leaving his son Louis of Anjou in English-held Calais as a replacement hostage, John was allowed to return to France to raise the funds. But all did not go according to plan. In July 1363, King John was informed that Louis had escaped. Troubled by the dishonor of this action, and the arrears in his ransom, John did something that shocked and dismayed his people. He announced that he would voluntarily return to captivity in England. His council tried to dissuade him, but he persisted. Citing reasons of good faith and honor, he sailed for England that winter and left the impoverished citizens of France again without a king. John was greeted in London 1364 with parades and feasts. A few months after his arrival, however, he fell ill with an unknown malady. He died at the Savoy Palace in April 1364. His body was returned to France, where he was interred in the royal chambers at St. Denis Basilica. Personality. John suffered from fragile health. He engaged little in physical activity, practiced jousting rarely, and only occasionally hunted. Contemporaries report that he was quick to get angry and resort to violence, leading to frequent political and diplomatic confrontations. He enjoyed literature and was patron to painters and musicians. The image of a warrior king probably emerged from the courage in battle he showed at the Battle of Poitiers and the creation of the Order of the Star. This was guided by political need, as John was determined to prove the legitimacy of his crown, particularly as his reign, like that of his father, was marked by continuing disputes over the Valois claim from both Charles II of Navarre and Edward III of England. From a young age, John was called to resist the decentralizing forces that impacted upon the cities and the nobility, each attracted either by English economic influence or the reforming party. He grew up among intrigue and treason, and in consequence he governed in secrecy only with a close circle of trusted advisers. He took as his wife Bona Bohemia and fathered 11 children in 11 years. Due to his close relationship with Charles de Lacerda, rumors were spread by Charles II of Navarre of a romantic attachment between the two. Lacerda was given various honors and appointed to the high position of constable when John became king. He accompanied the king on all his official journeys to the provinces. Lacerda's rise at court excited the jealousy of the French barons, several of whom stabbed him to death in 1354. Lacerda's fate paralleled that of Edward II of England's Piers Gaveston and John II of Castile's Alvaro de Luna. The position of a royal favorite was a dangerous one. John's grief on Lacerda's death was overt and public. Ancestry, family and children. On 28 July 1332, at the age of 13, John was married to Bona Bohemia, daughter of John I of Bohemia. Their children were Charles V, Louis I, Duke of Anjou, John, Duke of Berry, Philip II, Duke of Burgundy. Joan married Charles II of Navarre. Marie married Robert I, Duke of Bar. Agnes, Margaret, Isabella Valois married Gian Galeazzo I, Duke of Milan. On 19 February 1350, at Nanterre, he married Joanna I of Auvergne, Countess of Auvergne and Boulogne. She was the widow of Philip of Burgundy, the deceased heir of that duchy, and mother of the young Philip I, Duke of Burgundy, who became John's stepson and ward. John and Joanna had 3 children, all of whom died young. Blanche, Catherine, a son. He was succeeded by his son, Charles.